Hello and welcome back to Hyperstone Quest. After that big victory last time, I was feeling pretty good, feeling pretty confident, feeling ready to take on the hunting grounds again, and oh boy, what a difficult land. I ended up grinding out quite a few runs in the hunting ground, and none of them went well. Some of them went better than others, but none of them went very well. And I feel like I don't even know what I don't know. I feel like I'm at a point where, in order to really make progress in the hunting ground, I'm going to have to I'm going to have some kind of new insight. Because the way that I've been playing has seemed solid. It has felt very solid for the most part. But I get into situations where I realize that I've lost several turns after whatever fateful decision I made. Sometimes my plays were not so great. Sometimes I just got greedy, like right here, and put myself into a situation where maybe I could have escaped from this, but I really stacked the deck against myself. Some of the deaths were just down to carelessness, trying to mix up the patterns sometimes, or do things a little bit differently than the way that I knew that they needed to be done. And sometimes I got away with that, and sometimes I didn't. I did a lot of experimenting with the Orb of Ferocity. It's something that I still don't really get and can't even pick up consistently, so that's something that I'm going to need to study a little bit harder. But I think that there must be something to it. There must be some way of using it effectively that I'm just not figuring out. One of the more interesting things about the hunting ground is that when you get up into the mid-20s, it changes pretty significantly. The dogs stop running away from you, and then you have to deal with both the dogs that are pursuing you and the wandering dogs that come around randomly. And as you go along, there's more and more of the wandering dogs, and so you end up spending more and more time dealing with combat rather than picking up treasures. And because of the ambush mechanic, you can't just grab treasures as you run the way you can in other lands. I found that once I made it past that point, I was relatively able to make it into the 30s, but not past that. I don't think I got a single 40 in my entire grind. I know that some people had talked about this land being very RNG heavy because the wandering dogs could show up and just cut you off while you were still trailing a fairly large entourage. But I'm not sure how much of my deaths were actually down to that happening versus how much of them were down to carelessness, because carelessness was a really big issue throughout this entire grind. I've also started wondering if maybe picking up multiple treasures is a better idea, because once you get later on into the late 20s and the 30s, you start to get smaller and smaller ambushes, and so I almost think that I might need to take advantage of those smaller ambushes in a way that I haven't figured out yet. Watching a lot of these back, even in the very late game ones, what I'm realizing is that a lot of situations that I get into, I did have an out. And I just didn't realize that I had fewer options than I thought I did. All of the information was still there for me to see it. I just misinterpreted it. So I really don't think that randomness is in play as a reason why I'm losing these runs. Maybe later on down the line we'll start seeing some stuff that really is just there was no way out of that situation. But right now, I feel pretty confident in saying that becoming more aware of my positioning and the upcoming tactics, looking forwards a few moves into the future, is going to make a really big difference in my survival through the late game. I also found that fatigue and concentration fatigue were a really big issue. I pretty quickly got into a state where I was just making a lot of careless mistakes and not paying as much attention as I need to pay for this land. This is a land that's going to require a lot of concentration, and one of the problems that I started running into is that the early game is so repetitive, it's the same every single time, and so I started to develop a little bit of resentment and a little bit of frustration and a little bit of what I call easy game syndrome, which is when I am playing an easier game or an easier part of a game, and because I know that it's easier, I don't take it seriously enough, and so I end up making more mistakes than I might make in something that was a little bit harder if I was taking it more seriously. Another issue that raises is that managing the emotional game working through this grind may end up being pretty important. The emotional game is something I often talk about where just managing your emotions as you're playing a game can have some real strategic value, because the level of decision making that you're capable of, the kinds of decisions you make, and how careful you are can really depend on your emotional state. And when you get frustrated, when you get upset, there's this whole idea of being tilted, which is goes back to pinball tables. When if you hit a pinball table too hard, it will trigger a tilt mode, and it'll basically switch off, and you'll lose your entire game. And so the idea of tilting emotionally is the same thing of, if you get upset beyond a certain point, then you've already lost. Now, there was one run that I had where I actually don't really know what happened. I don't know if this was a glitch or if there's something that I'm not understanding, but you can see here that I went to pick up a treasure and a third dog appeared seemingly out of nowhere. So even though things did not go the way that I wanted them to, I feel like by going back over these losses, I have developed a little bit more of an understanding of what it is that I need to do to improve, what it's going to take to get a PB here, and a little bit of a better idea of what the next step is towards getting 50. So that's where I'm going to leave it for today, and next time I think I want to go for something a little bit more conventional, a little bit more of an adventure, probably do a multi-part series. One of the things that I am thinking about is, if we're going to be doing this land in orb strategy mode, then we're going to have some orbs available, and so there might be some cool stuff that we can do there. But I don't know if we're going to do that right away, or if we're just going to do some classic just to enjoy that. Haven't made a decision yet. But until then, I want to say a big thank you to my patrons on Patreon. They really help this out a lot. And thank you to everyone who watches, likes, comments, subscribes. Every little bit of encouragement means so much to me. So until next time, thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.